Hi, this is Josh Hale, and this is Beyond Code is Law. Hi, this is Josh Hale, and this is Beyond Code is Law, Dissecting Decentralized Governance. I'm joined today with Alice Zhang of the CU Protocol, as well as Eric Alston. We're going to be discussing Lido. Lido's been in the news in the past probably 12 months for the staking protocol from Ethereum 1 to Ethereum 2, depending on how you want to define those terminologies at this point. But ultimately, it's had some pushback both from within the market and questions outside the market. Can you tell us a little bit about the controversy that you're seeing as far as Lido, Eric?
Yeah. And if you ask Lido, they would say we're too popular and we're providing too good of a service. And so to me, I think there's some truth to that in terms of the underlying set of individuals who are adopting at a high level the services that Lido provides. What is that service? Enabling individuals who either can't afford the amount of ETH required to stake or are concerned about the opportunity cost of locking up, 32 ETH in a particular validator node to receive the rewards from staking ETH, a proportion of those rewards smoothed across a set of node operators that Lido directly maintains and operates, or a different way of putting it is Lido chooses an operator class that then stakes ETH and validates the network on behalf of a broader class of individuals who have provided the ETH in the first instance. And those individuals, the benefit they get are, again, some portion of the rewards, as well as a token, a derivative token called staked ETH or STETH, that they can then use as collateral in other projects around the Ethereum ecosystem.
It's interesting when you make the comment that Lido's response to this is our product is too good. I tend to always pull back from a comment like that. You hear it in the United States right now with Apple and the iPhone, right? That the iPhone is too good, yet you don't see the market penetration of Apple the rest of the world. If the product was too good in the overall, you would seem to think that it would be the same market penetration worldwide, right? That's saying to me that there's something else going on. In Lido, it's almost as if while the commentary is from Lido in particular that the product is too good, that there may also be something else going on. And I don't know what that is exactly, but what I can say is that there's there's an opportunity cost in trusting any like protocol, any exchange, anything that is holding funds of yours in any way, shape, or form. We saw that last year in FTX. I mean, like if you listened to the prognosticators saying that, what's the best exchange out there? Just 18 months ago, you would have heard FTX as the very number one, and you could trust them. They were the ones to go to. And I think that part of the pushback against Lido is the same pushback that we needed at the time of FTX.
And so one thing I want to be clear about is I don't take an issue with Lido's protocol as safely custodying, for lack of a better word, although technically that's not what they're doing, but safely tracking and maintaining the ETH that individuals have staked with them vis-a-vis the tokens they issue. But there is a different form of trust that Lido requires that certain members of the Ethereum ecosystem, including core devs, say this is problematic with respect to certain animating principles that all actors on this network are meant to be aligned with. And in particular, the Lido DAO governs the choice of node operators. And so, in a sense, there's an intermediary governance layer with a reasonably concentrated token distribution in terms of those who hold the Lido DAO's governance token can ultimately define who are chosen as node operators on the Ethereum network, or who are chosen by Lido as node operators to perform as validators on the Ethereum network on behalf of all the ETH that is staked with Lido. And so the one concern is, isn't this supposed to be open access in a sense that anyone who wants to stake 32 ETH should be able to freely participate on the network? And to be clear, something I haven't mentioned yet is Lido is responsible for approaching 33% of the Ethereum staked on the network itself. And so when they hit that particular numerical boundary, there are additional implications for the extent to which blocks can be said to be finalized, because they can technically have an influence over exactly that component once they hit that level. If they were to hit 50%, the implications would be even stronger in terms of their ability to potentially do bad things. But it's important to note Lido's response here. Their response is, why would we do that? Why would we blow up what is, from their perspective, a very useful service that they're providing to individuals who want to stake ETH, derive the rewards that come from staking ETH, but simultaneously not have to commit in a locked up way their ETH? And so it's a way of kind of separating the asset, the underlying asset, from the cash flow associated with it, something that is also common in other areas of finance. Different types of derivatives have long enabled you to do that, and that's Lido's defense. But it's really important to note that requires individual stakers to trust in the alignment of Lido's incentives and to effectively trust their decision-making through the governance of their DAO, which is problematic with respect to kind of the openness and resilience, and potentially has implications for the finality of transactions themselves if Lido hits a big enough sort of share of the staked ETH out there.
We discussed a little bit before we got on the call that the idea of Lido has this very strong impact on the Ethereum ecosystem because of the amount of influence they have. And for me as an attorney, as I said before, there's a very strong correlation between Lido and ETH and BlackRock and the overall market, right? Like BlackRock, and it's not just BlackRock, it's State Street, I think it's called, and there's another one, Vanguard. But if you look at the primary companies that have that BlackRock has a stake in, they are, overall, like, involved in nearly every important company across the board. And that's like the stock market, right? That's the biggest thing that exists on earth for movement of money, besides, like, the actual movement of money, which is like Forex. But with the stock market, you're sitting there going, boy, this one company has that much power. It doesn't matter if your alignment is right. What matters is like this. My dad had a very colorful phrase that I will be very wise to not use his phrase, but it's like the guy with we'll call it the biggest baseball bat in the room. He has not just the idea of being able to say, I like this thing better, but he also has, not just like the carrot of I like this thing better, but he's also literally got the stick. And I think that's part of the problem as far as where people are pushing back on Lido, saying, yeah, you may have, let's say you do have the best protocol out there. Awesome. Let's say you do have the intent to be, to be good overall. That doesn't also necessarily mean that your actions are beneficial overall. It's beneficial to Lido. And that's, I think, the pushback. That doesn't mean that they ever have ill intent. I'm sure if you were to talk to Sam Bankman-Fried today, his initial response to you would be, I never had ill intent. Even if we all, have different viewpoints on that now, that probably would be a response that he would say today as well. So for Lido to come back and say, we don't have reason to wreck this ecosystem, I don't know, after the past couple of years, for me, that kind of falls on flat ear, or, it kind of falls flat, right?
Well, and I think you've hit on a really important point by evoking BlackRock and other major institutional investors that command an outsized influence in the performance and also the governance of the companies that they have major stakes in, which is there are many cases, and I think the ideal is the vast majority of cases, although I'm not saying that's true, where BlackRock's interests align with those of relatively atomistic shareholders in the companies that they're engaging in the governance in. But the thing to really interrogate that you kind of hit the nail on the head on is, are there cases where Lido's interests cut against those of the broader Ethereum ecosystem? And so one such concern is simply if it's a relatively small class of token holders choosing an increasingly large share of the validators on the Ethereum network, that alone can pose regulatory compliance concerns, because arguably they're being coordinated by a single entity that is identifiable through the use of the governance token on that network itself. That to me, though, is an unintended consequence on the part of Lido. They probably don't want regulatory liability in terms of choosing node operators, but a concern that has been listed by Ethereum developers is that unintended consequence of centralizing, dare I say, that much governance authority over choosing an increasingly large class of validators. But there are also potentially other margins where the existence of Lido and its scale are not fully aligned with the broader sets of users, Ethereum users, and other, non-restaking based validator sets.
So we have Alice here as well, and she is part of the Q protocol, which has a differing idea on governance, on how to deal with governance in a situation maybe not unlike Lido, where part of what you're assuming is that as long as the stakeholders are the ones that are making, for example, constitutional changes to the overall protocol, right? They're going to, of course, and probably rightfully so, if you look at a capitalist market, they're going to vote for the things that are most beneficial to themselves. The Q protocol, while I am a root node myself, I'm not going to get into too much of it, but I'll let Alice respond. The Q protocol says if you're going to do governance, it might be smarter to do it from a truly decentralized, non-interested third party that's saying, here's your constitution. Are you following your own constitution? If not, here's the veto for this new vote. And I'm curious, Alice, from your point of view, do you think that the decentralized idea of governance has enough power to affect a protocol like Lido that would be basically saying, hey, your power in the marketplace is too strong, and your decisions are necessarily going to affect yourselves positively and the rest of the overall Ethereum network negatively? Here's how we intend to, fix it. And I'm paraphrasing to a large extent, but is something like Q the right answer to, that oversized influence?
Well, I'd like to say it is, and certainly the challenges that people are facing, especially with the Lido controversy, is, something that we think about, especially in the context of the Q protocol, and also taking sort of a step back from more of a constitutional sort of perspective. Obviously, you have ideas of, how do you protect minority stakeholders against mob rule? And in the Q constitution, of course, we say obviously the Q token holders are the ultimate owners of the system. So realistically, if they want to amend the constitution and amend the rules by which Q operates, it's that right. And if there's sufficient voting power who want that, then of course that can happen. But we still sort of try to anchor governance security with the Ruler panel in the sense that the Ruler panel still have oversight to ensure that at least due process is followed in accordance with the different types of votes that originate from the Q token holders. And on Q, depending on the severity of the change that is required, the required quorum and majority is different. And part of the role of the root nodes is, of course, if there is a proposal on Q that's been voted in, it's up to them to check, is that proposal categorized correctly in terms of magnitude? And then is the required quorum and majority followed? And we'd like to think that as such, sort of more overall sort of changes by the majority that could affect the minority in a way that perhaps goes against certain values of, being a good member of a community would require fundamental changes that require a much higher quorum, for instance, to be met. And in cases when that doesn't happen, the root nodes are there to identify, to say, no, you've passed this improperly, you tried to sneak this through as a detailed proposal, but we're going to veto. And of course, we think that expert panels could also be helpful because ultimately the problem with mob rules that there is, of course, bullying of the minority, there's a lack of expertise, but, just certain ideas. And that.
There's always a risk when you have a voting system of the idea of tyranny of the majority. That's been in existence since like the rise of democracy, right? This is something that, the idea of a constitution, when you first had democracy, there was no idea of a constitution. That only came later. And I saw a proposal the other day of somebody who was building a project, and they had an idea of they were kind of referring to as a constitutional amendment and then a permanent constitutional amendment. A constitutional amendment would be something along the lines of changing the way a protocol works. You need a supermajority to do that. But a permanent one, once you had instated it as the base part of the protocol, you couldn't change it. For example, we will never discriminate on the basis of race, religion, or whatever. That's something that is in our protocol. We very specifically won't do that. I do find it interesting that so few DAOs, so few projects really make use of the idea of a constitution as anything other than probably like idealistic principles, but it's not actually instituted in such a way that protects anybody. And that's what a constitution's for, right? It's to protect the minority against the majority. We just went through a vote and where I live, where the majority basically said, anytime it's 51%, we should be able to change the law. And I'm sitting there as an attorney going, that's the whole reason we have a constitution, guys. No, we shouldn't be able to change the law just because the majority says it. And they said, well, the majority voted, so therefore it's okay. And I'm going, no, you can't do this. for Lido, I'm kind of curious as to the something I've not looked into, honestly. What sort of protection does Lido have for the minority? And maybe even for the minority being, as it comes up, the minority of the rest of the Ethereum blockchain.
So I want to interject really quickly, because what's interesting is Lido is currently still a minority within the Ethereum ecosystem. But if you draw the trend line, the concern is they become the most important minority among many other disaggregated groups. Maybe that's a majority with respect to what's happening with Lido. And I think what we're seeing is, initially there was a proposal within Lido to voluntarily limit the extent to which they would perform the amount of ETH that would be staked within their protocol, and on the back of which they would issue more staked ETH tokens for their original contributors, so to speak. But that was voted down pursuant to the discussion you had earlier about Lido is positioned to maximize its own interests. That has led to discussions in the Ethereum ecosystem being, is there any way we can otherwise limit Lido? But I think that a sufficiently strong response may cut against other principles that animate the Ethereum ecosystem. Imagine you just say, well, we're going to prevent you from continuing to grow your stake. I'm not sure that how that would be technically possible, but I've heard that bandied about in terms of ways in which you maybe want to limit the power of Lido. The problem being is, depending on your perspective, that sounds like a pretty profound regulatory taking, which is the government changes the regulation for an area where I owned a big lake, and I make all of my money every year by leasing the lake to different fishermen. And so I issue permits, and they say, ultimately, this isn't good for the ecosystem of your lake, let alone what's happening downstream in terms of the importance of those fish and other effects of fishing the lake. And so we're going to prohibit you from using your lake to lease it to fishermen that want to use it. Have they taken my property? No, it still remains mine. The problem is they've taken away the entire economic livelihood that I derive from it. Am I saying that that will necessarily happen to Lido? Of course not. But I think one of the troubling concerns is if the network establishes a precedent for figuring out how to take the reward stream from a subclass of validators, that seems like a fairly centralized decision with respect to the property rights that are meant to be fairly decentralized on the network. And so to me, they're kind of caught between two hard positions, which is the remark I made in opening, which is the sheer popularity of Lido versus the unpleasantness of many interventions to limit Lido's influence on the network as themselves being kind of a form of centralized intervention in what is supposed to be a decentralized system.
Couldn't you, without what you're calling a regulatory take, because I'm not sure I agree entirely, but couldn't you, even without getting into the idea of a taking where you prevent people from owning, couldn't you very simply do some sort of thing like quadratic voting that you've seen in other protocols to limit the influence of a otherwise heavy weight for a whale, that would the very least make it so voting wasn't quite so one-sided? I'm not saying that is the solution, but I'm saying there are solutions that are not tantamount to a taking.
And I didn't mean to intimate that any intervention to limit Lido's power would be a taking. I'm saying at the limit, if you said you can no longer derive benefits from this particular class of smart contracts, I think that would be a taking. And to be clear, I'm not saying, but like at some limit, if you completely reduce their revenue generating opportunities, it would operate as a taking. But to me, the big rub is what you're describing sounds like a voting rule that the Lido DAO would have to adopt.
It's not, no, I'm not talking about the Lido DAO. I'm talking about like literally on ETH, for changes to the overall ecosystem to prevent, that sort of thing, or validation, that sort of thing. You could do maybe some sort of quadratic validation as well, I suppose.
That's an interesting suggestion, although I suspect, given how carefully designed the staking incentives were, that throwing in that material of a change would likely have other consequences. I can see how it would operate to limit the power that Lido would exercise, because as it just accrued more and more validators that it controlled through its choice of node operators, that their stake would naturally diminish in terms of anything Lido was pointed out that the rest of the sort of decentralized class of validators would not be subject to. And so that would absolutely reduce the voting block power, but it also, make no mistake, would be a fairly profound change to the consensus mechanism of the system itself.
I mean, I'm okay with that. Sorry, Vitalik. It is interesting because there's got to be fixes for these sort of things as they come up, and I don't actually agree with you that limiting how big. I think the difference in your analysis there on the lake idea is it's almost like a company who has a lake, and every time they dig out a scoop of the lake, a piece of land, they get more lake. But there's only 100 acres total. They can keep digging until they get 100 acres, but ultimately there's only 100 acres total. So I think there's a profound pushback against that idea of, well, you're taking it by not letting them earn as much. It's more saying you can earn as much as you want, but what we're saying is as you continue to earn more, there's still only 100 acres. So what we're telling you is that you can only own 10 acres or whatever the number is. I don't even care what number is in a way. But ultimately, the saying to a company that you can only go so far before it's too much is, for example, you said that it was 33% that you think that they currently control. Maybe that's the number. Maybe that's the magic number of saying you can't go beyond this number. Saying they can get more, they can choose to, aggregate and continue to earn, which would make their actual value in terms of the overall ETH system probably higher, but they may not be able to continue what validators had.
Well, let's see if you like this analogy better. Same example, but the lake owner says, I want to issue another 100 licenses this year. Last year was great. I made a lot of money. And the EPA comes in and says, you will kill the ecosystem in your lake if you issue that many licenses. And so they're not affecting the existing set that have been issued. And frankly, a lot of takings cases are argued in exactly these terms, where the government says, we aren't actually taking the fundamental value of your property. We are just limiting the externalities that your desire to maximize your economic revenues are creating for people who also live alongside this lake or who just derive ecosystem value from it. And so I wasn't trying to say any intervention would be a de facto take. Was definitely not saying that. It's more that Lido's position is we want to take as much ETH as people are willing to stake with us. And we'll always do good things with it. And other people in the Ethereum ecosystem are like, not so sure that that's just a continuous improvement path, in the sense that there may be non-linear consequences, which is we haven't had massive externalities yet, but that doesn't mean those externalities are not going to occur. And I haven't even listed some of the other downsides that the concerned Ethereum citizens, for lack of a better word, have voiced, such as, to me, potential fragility within the ecosystem, especially because staked ETH can then be rehypothecated in a variety of interesting ways, including in particular, I'm forgetting the name of the network right now, but as a collateral to validate optimium proofs and validium proofs for different roll-ups on L2s. And if your head is kind of spinning a little bit when it's like, okay, so off-chain validation, a different validator class that staked ETH is the input to, my head is spinning a little bit too, in the sense of I probably can't think through all of the downstream consequences of that complex of an architecture already. Granted, some people, I think, are devoting considerable thought to it, so that's not saying, oh, it's inherently fragile, but the more complexity you introduce into the ecosystem, including that is facilitated by smart contracts that are spanning potentially different networks, to me, necessarily you're increasing your risk associated with any one of those smart contracts failing in ways that you can't fully predict. And that risk, according to developers, that never goes to zero. And my contention is if you layer on enough smart contract interactions, the probabilities may not just be additive, they might even be multiplicative.
Everybody, this has been Josh Hale, joined with Alice Zhang and Eric Alston. We've been discussing the Lido Ethereum blockchain, and we have been discussing some of the ups and some of the downs of Lido staking and what the Lido community says about Lido, and obviously what the Ethereum blockchain community says about Lido as a whole. And this has been more a thoughtful discussion on the positives and negatives from both of our point of views. And we'd like to thank you for taking your time to listen to us here on Beyond Coda's Law. And thank you so much for dissecting decentralized governance with us. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time, Alice and Eric, and hope you both have a great day.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Josh Hale, and you've been listening to Beyond Coda's Law, where we dissect decentralized governance.